Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, it's not advanced. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, great. Can everybody hear me? Okay, excellent. Thank you for coming to this presentation tonight. And I'd like to personally thank Sandy for asking if I would do a presentation on the story behind my photos. I post a lot of photos now and then on Facebook, and there was a recent one, and you'll see it in this presentation, that she had made a comment, would I be interested in doing this? And I said, yes. I've never given a talk on the story behind the photographs. I've always given talks on, like Glenn said, about Raptor ID, and then also technical stuff I've done for photography clubs. So I decided to start at the very beginning with all of this, and where photography started with me. But before we do that, because I'm sharing a story, both my wife and I, Ann, recently read this book by Drew Lanham, and it's a quote that is very pertinent to what we're doing. I believe the best way to begin reconnecting humanity's heart, mind, and soul to nature is for us to share our individual stories. And again, thank you, Sandy, for letting me share my individual story. So I started my photography in the early 70s, and I got my first true camera in 1973, and it was a Nikon F, fully manual, manual exposure, manual focus. You had to, manually advance the film. You had to use a light meter, but with time, you learn how to just look at a subject and know what to set it at. I still use all the things that I learned back then today. I went to college at Columbia College, took classes in photography for a year and learned a lot about the darkroom and everything else. At the time, I was into nature. I like going backpacking, camping, hiking in the woods with my friends. I like just sitting on the grass somewhere and watching whatever. At the time, because it was almost all black and white photography, I was into Ansel Adams and his zone system. And the photograph on the upper right illustrates some of that, where you're trying to control different tones. And that's when I learned how to do things in the darkroom with the developer and lighting and masking and just all kind of dodging and burning, they called it. But the thing that I really started enjoying was looking at things from a different perspective. When you go to the zoo and you see people taking pictures of zoo animals, they're all nice, beautiful photographs. But I tried getting a little bit different angle. And this is almost a very sad photograph. This is Lincoln Park Zoo in 1973. And this led me to my real first love, which was street photography. I would just like to either walk around the neighborhood. If I heard a police car, I went to where it was going. My friends and I would get on a bus on Grand Avenue and just go down the bus. And if something was happening somewhere, we'd get off and start taking pictures of whatever was going on. This was a car accident not far from home. So, I went a little bit too fast. There we go. Oh, sorry. Okay, there we go. So I went through some life changes in my early 20s. I got married, started having kids, started working ungodly hours, started a business, started working double ungodly hours. And the only photographs I took for 20 some years was of my kids. And I'm not going to share any of those because we all have them. But in the early 90s, I started really getting heavily involved with birding, and I was a very serious birder. And in about 94, 95, I started getting interested in raptors, and I wanted to start taking photographs of them. So I had traded in my Nikon camera. I had a couple of camera bodies at that time and went to Canon because Canon went to autofocus. And Ann, my wife, she bought me that 400 millimeter lens, which is an awesome lens that I still have today. And the media that I used was 35 millimeter slide film. I did get some photographs. These I had prints made from the slides. I did get some photographs. These are yellow-headed blackbirds from Wadsworth wetland when it was a wetland before they restored it or changed it or whatever. And that was at a time when you can be 20 feet away from these birds. So I ended up being somewhat happy, but I wanted to start photographing raptors. And this is where things changed drastically. I'd go out with 2-3 rolls of film. These are 36 exposure rolls. And I'd get home, bring it to the store to have them developed. A week later, pick it up, and then start looking at them. And the disappointment was overwhelming. One out of every 50 photos was in focus. And that is a northern hawk owl in the lower left. And they're all exposed properly, but I just didn't get a handle on it. And every time I pressed that button, it was $1. And I said, this isn't going to last long. So I gave up on the camera, got back into hawk watching big time in the late 90s. And then in the early 2000s, I started seeing friends posting photographs of hawks and from images and angles that I never saw before. And I was doing more hawk ID stuff. And at the time, Jerry Liguri, I'm sure you've heard of him, he would send me images, digital images, and I had no way of doing anything because I was still using slide projectors. So I thought that maybe I should buy a camera. And I bought that Rebel XT. It was an entry level camera, digital. And look at the megapixels, 8.2 mega. I think our phones have that now. But about less than a month later, I went up to my favorite migration spot, Brockway Mountain in Michigan near Copper Harbor. And I'd been going there this was like the 7th year in a row I had gone there. And if you go there for 3-4 days, you'll get one day, maybe 2 days, if you're like 2 mornings, I should say, because by the afternoon, the light's all wrong, where you'll see good raptor migration, and they come fairly close. And one thing that was nice about this with film, you had to finish the roll before you could develop it. You had to go to the store, have them develop it, and then sadly look through them. With this, I take pictures at 10 o'clock in the morning, and by 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm back in the cabin looking at my photographs on a computer. And it was just, the learning process just sped up big time. To this day, that's still one of the best sharp-shinned hawk photos that I've ever taken. But it was the broadwing hawks that captivated me, because up until then, when I would see broadwing hawks, like most of us, they're way the heck up in the sky and you can barely make them out. But I was starting to see them and photographing them from different angles, like a topside view. And then seeing behavior, started noticing things that these birds were doing when they were starting to form groups and kettles. And kettles are these swirling groups of broadwing hawks. And I only had the camera for about 3 weeks at the most, maybe. And I took this photo. And at the time, I was the flyway editor for Hawk Migration Studies. And I sent this and a bunch of other photos to the editor. And I was awarded when she saw it. When she saw it, she said, "Oh my God, Vic, let's use this for the cover of the fall issue." You might see 2005 at the bottom. The reports are 1 year later. This was fall of 2006. So that was my first published photo. Then reality check came home, and I realized there's no hawks around. I realized too that this was going to be difficult. And I started trying to photograph other birds, but I was really into raptors. And sometime in June, when I was trying to photograph a red-tailed hawk, it was too far away. And I looked down and a dragonfly landed. I didn't know what it was. It was a basket tail now, years later. And I took a photograph of it. When I got home and looked at my photos, it was like, wow, that's pretty cool. So I said, I'm gonna learn a little bit more about dragonfly photography. And in July, I started going heavy with it. I used the same equipment. I had a new camera now. That one was also 8.2 megapixel. And to this day, that's still one of my best Blue Dasher photographs. Then the following winter, and Ann and I had been to the Mississippi River a few times prior to me getting a camera. But this 2 Wednesdays in a row, I went alone, left the house at 4:30 in the morning, got there about roughly around 8 o'clock. My goal was to photograph bald eagles. And when I drove up at Lock and Dam 13 near Fulton, I was just amazed at how many bald eagles there were around. I had just bought a new 300 millimeter f4 lens, and I never used it yet. I brought it on this trip. And just as I was looking at these birds, I saw one bald eagle coming real close, and I choose to grab that lens and camera. Well, as I was pulling it out of the car, I must not have fastened the lens properly on the camera body, and the lens came off, hit the ice, and skidded about 25 feet. And all I did was stare at it for about 30 seconds. And I was just like, what just happened? Well, I went over there, looked at it, had one scratch on it only, and I put it back on the camera, put that camera back in the car, and I proceeded to take photographs. And I got hundreds of bald eagle photographs. And the beauty of this experience was that I was the only one there both Wednesdays. On the second Wednesday at around noon, another photographer showed up at noon. But on that side of the river, the lighting changes, and on the west side of the river, everything's backlit. So afternoons weren't good there. And again, to this day, I got some of my best bald eagle photographs. And this was 17 years ago. And I got all ages. I got a full spectrum of ages. I think I photographed something like 50 or 60 individual bald eagles. Okay, then later on that spring, I get a call from a friend, and he says, Vic, you're not going to believe this, but there's osprey nesting at a youth baseball complex, and the birds don't seem to care. So we drove there the very next day, and there's the nest. You could see this was, I think, 10 o'clock in the morning or something like that. And they're starting to get all ready to play baseball. More kids are coming. And over the course of a few weeks, the beauty of this is when the second learning experience, that observing amplifies your photography tenfold, and just learning how these birds react to things. And we watched them build a nest. Usually the male brought nest materials. They brought soft stuff like you see in the upper left, and not so desirable stuff like that plastic garbage bag on the right. But on one occasion, it was kind of crazy. Ann and I were sitting in the grass, and not much was going on. I think I was watching more baseball than I was anything else. And the female was on the nest, and she was just squawking, and I mean, just vocalizing like heavily. Well, the male was a good distance away in a tree, maybe a quarter mile or so. And through binoculars, you could see that it was eating a fish. Well, occasionally he would look up, do this, and then go back and eat, and she's squawking. Then he gets up, and he's gone for 10 or 15 minutes, and he comes rushing back. And as he comes back, she gets off the nest, and I didn't get any photos of it. The ones I did get were kind of blurred. And because I'm watching what's going on here, and he drops this big stick on the nest. One part stayed in the nest, the rest of it fell on the ground, and the umpire had to call timeout, and it happened numerous times. He had to call timeout so the kids can go pick the sticks up. It was just insanity. It was like, what is this, So I got some pretty neat photographs. The females did bring sticks now and then. And I added this one in here because it was when after the eggs were hatched, the nestlings were being fed and everything. But we're starting to see a large urbanization of raptors, especially osprey. And you're going to be hearing a lot more about it not only nesting on towers like the light towers, but also on cell towers. Okay, then the following winter, we went to South Dakota. This was our second trip there. And we would drive to Sioux Falls the first day. And then we were going to be going to observe raptors around Pierre, which is the capital. It's like in the south central part of South Dakota. And the day we were heading there, it was light snow, very foggy. Visibility was just awful. And when I got off the highway to go north to Pierre, it was still light snow, foggy, just ugly. And Ann said, oh, I started taking my camera stuff out and getting it ready. And she said, you honestly think you're going to get photographs in this conditions? And I said, I don't know, but let's be ready, because readiness is important. I don't think we drove up the highway, up the road at 5 miles, and I see something that I couldn't believe. And it was an adult ferruginous hawk. And what you're seeing behind there isn't the sky, it's fog. And that's frozen fog on the post itself. Well, it was this 2-lane road that I was on, and I needed to get off of it because there were going to be cars coming behind me. And I went on that little apron between the road and where the farmer's field is. The farmers use that little apron, and the bird didn't move. It just stayed there. I think I took about 30 photographs, and it had its head this way, that way, looking up, looking down, looking everywhere. And the only thing that made it fly away was a pickup truck had stopped. I think he was just wondering what I was doing. And when he started up again, his truck made a noise. The bird flew off. It flew to another post, but that post was a little bit too far off the road. And I figured I took enough pictures of this bird. One of the main reasons why we go to South Dakota is to see gyrfalcons. And this is an interesting one here. We had pulled into this little, very, very rural town, and I wanted to get some gas. I pulled into a gas station. It was a 2-pump gas station. And when I started getting out of the car, I noticed there was no place to put the credit card. And this gentleman walks out of the building. He had to be well into his 80s, if not 90s. And he said, sir, I'll take care of that. And I said, okay. So he starts pumping gas, and then he starts cleaning the windshields. And I'm like, what year is this? And then I see this gyrfalcon flying across. It wasn't real close, flying across and landing in this conifer just a little ways up. Well, I paid the gentleman and we drove away, and I never got anything closer than this. But I kind of like that photograph and the story behind it. And I did get a reward from this trip. I used to send all my photographs on a CD to Jerry Liguri, and he would talk about them with me and stuff like that. And he used this particular photo of one of the rough-legged hawks that I photographed there. And what he liked about it was how dark it was. It was almost a pure black bird. And I got several other photographs in that book too. Then later, a few months later, I get a call from another friend. And he says, Vic, there's an adult dark red-tailed hawk by this school. And this school is near Joliet. And sure enough, we went the very next day. I'm glad that these people called just before the weekends. So we drove there, and we pulled in the parking lot here, and I would look around, and the bird was off in a field in a tree, and then it would fly. It was always too far away, and I never really got any good pictures the first 2 or 3 times we went there. Oh, and at the time I was told by the person that told me about the bird, he said, Vic, do not tell one person about this because the bird seems to be a little tame. Well, I didn't see that at first, but as I started watching the bird, I noticed that it would land on a barn not too far away, maybe about, maybe a little over a quarter of a mile away from the school. And it would land on there, stay there for 10 to 20 minutes or so, and then go. So one day after a light snowfall, and the roof was covered with snow, we were sitting in the parking lot. I watched the bird land on that barn, drove over to it, got out of the car and stood behind some conifers. And I was literally, oh, I don't know, from here to the clock. That's how far away, up to the top of the ceiling. That's how far away I was to this bird. And I had no idea when it was going to leave, if it was going to leave, and which direction it was going to fly in. Well, I couldn't believe what happened. The bird took off. Oh, sorry. The bird took off, swirled around, and the snow on that angled roof acted like a reflector and just lit the entire bottom of this bird up. And I got maybe about a half a dozen nice shots of it. And then that was it, was gone. We visited that place maybe 20 times. And I got a number of good photos it was maybe 4 years. Yeah. Then back at Brockway, and I'd been going every year. Like I said, this was the 10th year that I'd gone in a row. And on this particular trip, my friend Robert, who's sitting here, this was his first trip up there, and he was in for some fun. So I prepped him on what he needed to get, what he needed to wear and stuff. And you could see me, I'm sitting there on the trail there in what's called a ghillie outfit. And right there. And a friend of ours took that picture of me walking down the hill. But when we would be sitting there, the camera was in full camo, we're in full camo, and you just sit and wait. And on this particular morning, I think we were sitting there, I don't know, maybe an hour, hour and a half. Whatever was flying was in a distance. We didn't even, and then I saw something. And I said, Robert, do not move a muscle until I do. Because the wind was just right. Everything was right for what was about to happen. I saw this juvenile northern goshawk, and at this point, I lifted my camera up and started taking photos. I didn't know if it was going to come any closer or what. But lo and behold, it did. And it came, this bird, it was like half the distance from here. Well, maybe almost to the door there, maybe a little bit closer. That's how close this bird came. And because of the way Brockway is, it's on a mountain sort of. The wind comes up. There's an updraft, and then there was a wind coming this way, and the birds just almost stand still when they're coming by. And we got several photos of it, and this photo ended up on the Cornell website for a number of years, but it's since been taken down. We also had an extremely close golden eagle. And the reason why this bird, we literally could feel and hear its wing beats as it came overhead. I mean, what was it, Robert? 10, 12 feet overhead. This photograph was taken when it was a little bit further away. But what was keeping this bird so low was, I think there were maybe 4 common ravens that had a nest just slightly up the mountain. And they went after golden eagles. They never go after bald eagles. And they just harassed this thing, and it just came down real low. Oh, yeah. This thing's a little touchy. There we go. Okay. So, Independence Grove, when I would go out photographing, Independence Grove is about 5 minutes from where we live. And a lot of times I would stop there. Sometimes I would stop at Van Patten. And on this one day, it was late in the afternoon, a couple hours until sunset. And I drove through Independence Grove and wasn't really seeing anything, hardly ever do. But then I saw a red-tailed hawk in some trees along the river in that furthest parking lot. If you've been to Independence Grove, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. And when I put the camera up on the bird, it was like, it's too far away. And I was using a 300 millimeter lens with a 2X on it. So I was at 600 millimeter. And the bird was too far away. Plus the sun was low and it was backlit. And I said, okay, I'm going home. Well, just as I'm getting ready to leave, it takes off and it's coming right at me. And it lands right in front of me. And yeah, it lands right in front of me. And I didn't know what to do because I was too close. I'm like, and I mean, that bird, I can't even express how close it was, but it was so close. And I just started firing away. And I was like, this is insanity that this bird did this. I thought maybe it was looking at something on the ground in front of me. I got several photos of it. It relaxed for a little bit. And then the weirdest thing happened. As I got my camera waiting for the bird to just do something a little different, I hear someone say, Vic. And I'm like, who recognizes me with my camera in my face? And I looked down, and well, it was a really nice couple that I had met a week before. And I said, hi. And they said, what are you photographing? And I said, the red-tailed hawk right above your car. And they looked, and at this point, the bird was kind of like, I'm done with this, and flew away. So I had told my family, my daughters, about this bird. And my daughter said, Dad, send me a high resolution file of that. And I said, Karen, I'll get a print made for you if you want. I'll get you, she said, no, Dad, just send me a high resolution file. And, when my daughter asked me for something, I do it, So little did I know that a few months later, she made a puzzle out of that photograph. And then, like I keep reiterating about observations, I got another call, and it was in 2010 in late August about, my friend said on the phone, Vic, you're not going to believe this, but we got Mississippi kites nesting in a parking lot, a school parking lot, across the street from a residential neighborhood. This was late Saturday afternoon. I think it was it was just before the Hawk Watch, because it was a Hawk Watch seminar that we were putting on. Very next day, Ann and I drive out there, sit in the parking lot for a while, hour and a half, and sure enough, one flies over. Well, the following year, they got on site in early May, and I don't know how many hours we put in there, but we were going every weekend. Sometimes we drive there Saturday, come home Saturday night, drive back Sunday, come back Sunday night, and I got thousands of photographs. But the coolest thing was the behavior and watching them, because with a lot of raptor photography, you can go hours and hours and hours and nothing happens, and then all of a sudden it happens. So I used to like when the adults would feed the young, and they typically fed them large insects, dragonflies, butterflies. I couldn't quite make out what this one was, but the adults once in a while would feed on chimney swifts, and they are basically on the wing hunters. Everything they catch is on the wing. So one day I got this photograph, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. How in the heck did this adult Mississippi kite get a fish? When I spread this around some of my raptor expert friends, they were all like, this is insanity. And there were a couple of thoughts, maybe some other bird was carrying it, and the Mississippi kite was nearby, the bird dropped it, and the Mississippi kite caught it midair. We did see them once in a while by the river there, the Rock River, and they'd be perched in trees, but we never seen them feeding on the ground. So it was just insane to see that. Like I said, I've got thousands of photographs, to the point where I've got 3 different age groups here, and they were all taken at that school parking lot, and they're all feeding on large insects. And what's really weird, not only is the pose almost identical, but they're all feeding with their left leg. So I don't know if they're lefties or what. I don't know. I did get rewarded with one photograph. Kevin Carlson, I'm sure you've heard of him. He's big time photographer, author, and he was looking for juvenile Mississippi kite photos. And I sent them a few, and he ended up using this one in 2 fly. They're like fold outs. They're laminated fold outs. They're really neat. So the things that I try to pay attention to is a relaxed look. Not every photo that I take, it's relaxed, but I always say the world doesn't need more photographs of birds flying away from the camera. So I like taking them where the bird apparently doesn't even know you're there. And this was a juvenile broadwing hawk that I photographed from the parking lot where the Mississippi kites were. We went looking, and because it was August when this photograph was taken, there had to be a nest very close by. We never found it though. And then this is an adult female northern harrier. And what's making it light up is snow. And if there's one thing, and I mentioned about that one red tail with the snow, snow is just the best lighting tool that you can use. This particular bird, a juvenile rough-legged hawk, we were driving down a road, and it was actually a paved road. And up ahead, I saw this juvenile bird flying over some trees. And I was thinking, do I stop the car here and wait for it to fly over? Or do I take a chance, get right to the edge of the trees, hop out of the car at the last second, and hopefully that bird's coming over? Well, that's what I chose to do. And when it came over, again, that sunlight, the sun was a little bit to my back, sunlight bounces off the snow, and this bird was probably a little higher than this ceiling here. And that's how close it came. It's full frame in the vertical. And that's a dark, rough-legged hawk, same kind of condition with the snow. The other thing I like is a different perspective. This is a juvenile dark rough-legged hawk. By the way, rough-legged hawks are my favorite. And this bird was on the ground, and it just lifted off a short distance off the ground, maybe 15 feet. And the terrain it dipped a little bit. So I had an eye level view of this particular bird, and just a little bit different angle. It started hovering, and then it eventually flew away. And like I mentioned before, different perspectives. You don't see broadwing hawks from that angle. This bird is a Swainson hawk from the Burlington nesting group. And again, observation, hours. We would go to where the main road was at, and the nest was a good quarter of a mile away from the road. And when the birds would come over, they were too high up for really good photographs. But I started noticing that they would fly west. And after giving up weekend after weekend after weekend, I said, let's go drive west and see what's going on there. Well, we went maybe about a mile west, and sure enough, saw one of the adults on the ground. They basically hunt on the ground. And I noticed that it had a rodent in one of its talons, but it was still hopping around. Well, when it took off, it came directly overhead. It's slightly backlit, came directly overhead. And I saw that, wait a second, it's got two rodents in its talons. So how does it grabbed one and kept hopping around and grabbed another one. And if you ever want to see relaxed birds from different perspectives, go where swallowtail kites congregate in late July, early August. This was taken in South Carolina a couple of years ago, and there were hundreds right in front of us. I also like relaxed looks of perch birds, rough-legged hawk. And this one here, this is a prairie falcon. We went on a trip into east central Kansas one year. My goal was to photograph as many different red tails as I could, different subspecies, I should say. And the night that we got into Kansas City and we were staying at the hotel, a friend of mine from Kansas messaged me and said, "Oh, Vic, when you get down to the wildlife refuge, make sure you look for prairie falcons. Every 3 or 4 years, one shows up." Well, we just got off the highway. We weren't even at the wildlife refuge yet. And sure enough, I said, "Holy cow, that's a prairie falcon sitting right in front of us." And this bird let me take dozens of photographs. It did fly to a bale of hay, and those photographs didn't look quite the same. And then if you ever want to photograph Swainson's hawks, you got to go to Colorado or Wyoming, and you got to get off of the roads. You got to get on roads that when you're halfway down the road, when you're in it about a mile or so, you start saying to yourself, why am I driving on this road? Because it's like bumpy, it's got holes in it. There might be parts that's flooded. I mean, this is all fine for all the trucks that the ranchers have, but we just had a Honda CRV. But you will come across, you could drive for an hour and then all of a sudden, bam, right in front of you is a beautiful Swainson's hawk. And one thing I have a rule of thumb when I'm trying, I don't know if it's a rule, but it's something I look for. And that if the subject is in the foreground, pay attention to the background, and vice versa. If the subject's in the background, pay attention to the foreground. And what you're seeing behind there is a field. And then that grayish, bluish, whatever that is up on top, that's actually the base of mountains that were at quite a distance behind this bird. This is a subspecies of a red-shouldered hawk in Florida subspecies. It was feeding on stuff in a ditch. And then every so often you'll see behavior that you can't quite figure out. And this is the female looking at the male and just, okay, what's happening here? Well, they ended up just sitting there, not doing anything, but it was just an interesting moment, let's call it that. And then sometimes you see things that are a little sad. On another one of these gravel roads in southern Illinois, came across this red-shouldered hawk right off the road, and it had been raining and drizzling all day. It was a miserable day I think it was in the 40s. And I saw this bird and it was like, should I take pictures of it or not? Because I felt sorry for it. Well, I took photographs of it. They got to live. So these are the main things I look for. Observation is number one. Patience. The first two are a decision. Actually, the first three are a decision. And the fourth one you learn by making a lot of mistakes and a little bit of luck. And I once read a long time ago that good luck is a result of putting the odds in your favor. So in East Central Wisconsin, we were it was a 2-day trip there, and on the last day, on the Sunday afternoon, we're driving down the gravel road, and it was farms and stuff like that, and all of a sudden I see this juvenile red-tailed hawk that's a Harlan subspecies, and I couldn't believe this bird, how close it was to the road. The farmhouse was right below it, the barn door was open, nobody was walking around. But I got my camera out and started photographing it. And you could see here, I got a number of photographs of the bird from my car window. And then right here, the bird decides to take off, which I figured it would anyway at some point. Not all do, though. That was one thing that early on with my photography of raptors, I was talking to Jerry Liguria on the phone, and I said, every single bird I stop for flies away. How do you get all those great images? And he said, Vic, not all of them do. And when he said that, I realized at that point that it was observation that was the most important thing now. And ask my wife, Ann, when we're driving down a road and I see a bird, I slow down and I'll say almost immediately, that one's not going to stay. It's going to fly away even before I stop the car. So at this point, the bird does fly away. And now I got to hop out of the car because I want to get any flight images I could. Even if the bird is going away out, I can use them in Raptor ID things and whatever. Well, right around here, the bird decides to turn around. Now this camera, I think it shot 7 or 8 frames per second. And I kept shooting. And as the bird got closer, I saw this and I'm like, oh, don't fly behind the trees, please. And don't focus on the branch, stay focused. Well, the camera did for some reason, and it came over and I got a really nice shot. But what happened next was the most amazing thing. It lands in that same tree. And at this point, I'm standing outside of the car And now I'm just taking pictures of it. And yes, this is not a relaxed look. It's kind of sinister looking, but I kind of like it. So here's the story of a very tame rough-legged hawk that I came across a couple of years. It was the year I retired from my career. And this was at Bong, and Bong is the kind of Bong SRA, it's called. It's in southern Wisconsin. It's the kind of place where you can go there and not see one thing, go there again, not see one thing, and then something happens. It's just tens of hours, hundreds of hours before something might happen. Well, this one morning we're driving around there, not seeing anything. Everything we did see was in the distance. Stopped in a parking lot and had lunch. And saw this bird across the road, pretty far away from the road. And I'm like, I told Ann, I said, there's something odd about this bird. It's just acting different. And I couldn't put a finger on what it was that my mind was telling me. But after I got done with lunch, the bird's still there. And I started walking towards it. And I would walk like maybe 10, 15 feet and then stop, take more pictures. And the bird, I knew this was going to happen. It let me walk right up to it. Again, that's a full frame image in the vertical. And this was a 400 millimeter lens with a 1.4x. I was at 560 millimeter with this one. Bird let me walk right up to it. And I noticed it was looking at something to my right. And I was like, well, what's it doing? Well, it hunched up and took off and flew and landed about 20 feet away from me and captured a vole. I had to actually walk back a little bit to get this photograph. And then it flew back up into a tree real close and started eating whatever. I couldn't make it out what it was. So that's the series of photos you just saw. And that afternoon and the following afternoon, and I was retiring from my career the following Friday. And I thought, wow, when I'm retired, I'm going to come here every day and get, well, the bird was gone. But the 2 Saturdays in a row that I was there, I got a ton of photographs of this bird. It would look, and these are all full frame vertical. And the bird would look up, it would look at me. It would sit there beautiful looking. And I never really got much flight shots because the bird, when it would take off, it was right in front of me. And this is the only flight shot I got of it overhead. Well, I got a few, but this is one of them. Then the bird was gone. And then 2 months later, we went up to a place called Kill Snake near Chilton. It's west of Manitowoc. And we're driving through there, not seeing anything. I think we had a couple of harriers, maybe a bald eagle, but not much was going on. This is 2 months later. And I pull up to this bird here, right off the road, and it's as tame as can be. And I said, I took a bunch of photos of it, and I said, no way. And I said, I have to do something. I got out of the car and the bird, I was able to walk right up to this bird. I mean, right up to it. And I said, this is insanity. Bird didn't take off. I got back in the car and we drove down and I'm like, I can't believe this is happening. So I did get photographs, side images, but not the same side. I got the left side of one and the right side of the other. Sent it to some friends that are raptor people and pay attention to detail. And we all agreed that these photographs, you just couldn't, because it's not the same side, 2 months difference, there could have been some molting, whatever. But a couple of them said, well, based on the behavior though, maybe they were the same bird. And for all these years, I thought that was the final verdict until 2 weeks ago, when Ann and I went up to Buena Vista. And actually this was south of Buena Vista, another area, and come across this adult male rough-legged hawk that was extremely, extremely tame. And I said, no way, the chances of it happening are slim to none. Well, I also been sending photographs to Brian Wheeler, who's a known raptor expert, an author. He's written 3 or 4 books. And I send him the photos and he emails me back. He says, wow, Vic, beautiful shot of that male rough-legged hawk. It's crazy how tame they are, isn't it? And at that moment, I started thinking, holy cow, I've photographed a lot of close male rough-legged hawks. Like this one here. This was up at Bong. Not much was going on one day. There was a birding group up there in a parking lot, and they were all looking in their scopes at a rough-legged hawk perched in a tree. And I got out of the car, said hello to a few of them that I knew. And as I was walking back to my car to leave, this rough-legged hawk, an adult male, flying right overhead, super close. And as I'm taking pictures, I'm yelling, guys, turn around, look at this. And it's got a little vole or something in its talons. And again, the snow just lit it up. And then this was also at Bong. It was on a day when I was there alone. And I think I was there a good 5 hours. And I call this photograph 5 hours of effort and 5 seconds of opportunity. Because in 5 hours, I had no photographs, nothing. And when I decided to leave, this is what happens. And it's kind of an artistic look, and it's an adult male. But sometimes it's females that are tame too. This was up with Buena Vista. It was during hunting season. And we were on a road, one of the main roads, and across the street, the hunters are in the field. And in the distance, you can hear gunfire and stuff. Well, I had just bought a 500 millimeter lens and I put a 1.4X on it. So I was at 700 millimeter. And I bought that lens to get photographs of raptors that were too far away. Like this one was at a little bit of a distance off the road. This is an adult female. Well, I didn't know how many photographs I was going to get because the bird was not going to move. At least I thought. Well, what does it do? It does move, and it flies directly in front of me. And I got a bunch of shots of it. And then what it does after that, it goes and lands on this slight little stick up. And I ended up with some of my best adult female perched rough-legged hawks. And in the background, you hear the gunfire and hunters and everything else. My photographs get used for all kinds of things. I showed you one a little while back, a couple of uses in books and pamphlets and stuff. I posted this on Facebook, and somebody decided that she wanted a tattoo. So she put a tattoo on her right shoulder, and she actually reversed the image because it was on her right shoulder. And she did ask me if she could use it. And I said, yeah, I'd be flattered, but you got remembrance of me the rest of your life. People do ask if I photograph owls. Not really. It's more by chance than anything else. The year after I started digital photography, I was getting heavy into dragonfly photography. A friend of mine, Ryan Brady, who lives up in Bayfield County, says, you want to photograph dragonflies, get up here. They're all over the place. So we went up there and we did see dragonflies. And on this particular day, it was late in the afternoon. It was a hot day. We were all sweated up. We had insect bite and mosquito bites. We were ready. We were calling it a day. We couldn't wait to get back to the hotel, get nice clean showers, go to the restaurant and just chill out for the rest of the night. And as I'm driving down this road back to the hotel, it was like 60 miles an hour. I mentioned to Ann, I said, boy, that stuffed owl by that house is really real looking. And she says, oh, I didn't see it. And I said, oh, I'll turn around. And she says, no, let's go to the hotel. I'm tired. And I said, no, you got to see it. So I turn around and I come back and stop. And I look at this thing and it turns its head. And then I said, wait a second, that's a great gray owl. It's July 1st. Well, that night I called Ryan Brady up and I said, Ryan, I'm going to send you some pictures. I got pictures of a great gray owl on, I can't remember the name of the road. I think it was Highway Q. And he said, okay, cool, Vic, but promise me one thing. Do not tell one person. And I said, no, I won't. And I didn't for 10 years. I got a whole bunch of photos, and it was kind of cool because we drove into this person's driveway to get these photographs. and not far into the driveway, just right off the road. And two other cars stopped, and they were vacationers or whatever, because they just had little point and shoots. And they're all laughing. Everybody's taking pictures of this bird, and it's just sitting there turning its head. And then it eventually flew away into the green foliage behind it. And then another occurrence that happened many years ago, I had left work early. I used to work near Milwaukee, and I brought my camera to work a lot. And I'm coming home. I left work. I don't know what time it was. It maybe 1:30, 2 o'clock. And I got here maybe around 2:30, something like that. And I drove into Bong, and I was just hoping to get a photograph of a red tail or maybe a harrier. That's all I was hoping to get. As I drove in, a short-eared owl flies directly over the road. And I'm like, whoa, it's daylight. Then I saw this one sitting on a post. And for the next 2 hours, I had more fun than I can ever remember. And I was the only person there, which was just heaven. I didn't get a lot of flight shots because they didn't come that close. This is one of them. But I did get a lot of perch shots. They were perching everywhere. And they were posing all different ways. Yeah. I mean, I counted at one point, I thought there were probably about 20 of them, and they were all around me. Never happened like that again. This was the last photo of the day when it landed and got a rodent. People ask if I do photograph other birds. I do. And this was reluctant. I had posted on Facebook. It was like towards the end of April, early May. And I said, well, raptor season's over. It's too early for dragonflies and butterflies. What am I going to photograph now other than wildflowers? And a friend of mine, he made a comment and said, Vic, you should go after warblers. And I said, no way, that's insanity. And I was right about the insanity part, but I had more fun in the 2 weeks, the first 2 weeks of May at Ryerson, Half Day, Daniel Wright, all along the river. And I took thousands and thousands of photographs, and I would go there about 3 PM and stay until like 6:30, and just got a ton of warbler photographs. And then another photograph that was used for a unique thing. We had this coyote in our backyard, and I got my camera right away and out the deck door. Our deck is like on the second level. And I was able to point down at it, and I got these photographs of this coyote. And what was unique about this coyote, it only had 3 legs. Yeah. And, but it walked fine. Well, I posted a couple of these pictures on Facebook, and Dawn Keller, a friend of mine, she emailed me and said, Vic, can I use that one photo? I'm putting together a flyer, a brochure on, informing people about coyotes and human interaction, and, that they're not going to kill you and stuff like that. And I said, yeah, that'd be great if you can use it. And she did. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I do photograph dragonflies. The one on the right is a common green darner and very common. The one on the left is not so common. That's a Heinz emerald. It's a very rare. They do exist in Door County. There's a couple places in Illinois, but trying to get to those places is next to impossible. And then, like I had mentioned earlier, always pay attention to the background, even though the subject's in the foreground. This is a perch Prince Basketail. And if you get into dragonflies, you'll realize that Prince Basketails very rarely stop. And I came across this one day, and the first photos I took of it weren't from this angle. But then I noticed behind the dragonfly was this spiderwort. And I took these photos. They're almost not right, one right after the other. And I positioned the camera to get the background, which was the spiderwort, behind the Prince Basket Tail. And all this took place in maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And then it did fly away. So again, I try to pay attention to the background. This is a 4-spotted skimmer. When I saw it, I was standing looking down at it. I saw the yellow flowers. I can't remember what they were behind it. They're native flowers. I just don't remember what they were. They weren't sunflowers. But anyway, I got down low at eye level and took pictures of that 4-spotted skimmer with the flowers behind it. Again, this is a widow skimmer. And in recent years, I started doing a little, it's not a technique, I don't know, it's a style, I guess, where I call it wing detail. Because when you look at that wing, it's just mesmerizing. I also photograph butterflies. My favorite is the regal fritillary. We went on a trip to Kansas in the summer, and then also at Natusa grasslands. And on that trip, I was able to photograph 5 regal fritillaries in 5 different states, which was cool. And if we would have went up to Wisconsin, I would have had 6. They're a beautiful butterfly. Problem is they're on the open prairie where it's windy. So. And then this past spring, this snout was at Half Day Pond, and I was photographing dragonflies there, and the snout lands right in front of me. And for years, I've been trying to get a photograph of this. And then if you really want to have fun, try to photograph an Olympia marble. They show up like the first week of May at Illinois Beach, along the beach. They're very fast flyers, don't stay perched very long, and they like to land on this flower. It's their nectar flower. It's a spring cress, I think it's called. And on this one particular day when I was just like ready to give up, I noticed there were 3 of them flying around, and one was kind of lagging behind. So I concentrated on that one, and the spring cress only grows about 1 foot off the ground. And it landed, and I just fell on the ground and got a half a dozen shots, because I like butterfly photos from an angle, from where it's, it's flat in front of me. They're a really neat one. And then years ago, I did start photographing wildflowers, but just recently, in the last 2 or 3 years, I started concentrating more on a different style. And that style, I like paintings of wildflowers, but I said, wow, can I capture that with the camera? Well, on the left, you're seeing the basic setup. This is on a cloudy day is the best. And what you're seeing on the right is the photo exactly how it comes out of the camera. And, a lot of people frown on processing and stuff. They go, oh, that photo's been photoshopped. Well, you know what? If Ansel Adams was alive today, he'd be the Photoshop king. So I took that photo on the right, and this is what I ended up with. And then here's a few more examples. Colors look a little off. A few more. This is a technique that I started just a couple of years ago, where I noticed light colored flowers would lose. We probably should have shut that light. Light colored flowers were good with black backgrounds. And that's a white trillium. We'll be seeing them in about a month from now. And then my photos have appeared on 13 covers of Hawk Migration Studies. It's a journal of Hawk Migration Association of North America. Some of those you've already seen. I got countless photos on the inside. And these are my 4 recent photos. And then I've got a couple of photos from Brockway in Stokes Guide. Lots of photos in Hawks at a Distance. And the Raptor ID app, which is free at Hawkwatch International. And you can get it on your, if you got an iPhone or whatever. And Laguerre, he told me, he said, other than me and Brian Sullivan is his co-author. He said, Vic, we got more of your photos in here than anybody else. And I took that as quite a compliment. And then I wrote articles years ago. I haven't been writing too many in recent years. Some of these photos you already saw. And then I've been asked to help with some hawk watches across North America. And my buddy Robert here, he's got some photos in there too. And you'll see if you go to some hawk watches out east on the plaques, the kiosks and stuff, the hawk watches use my photographs there. A lot of online places. I don't even keep track anymore where they're being used. Oh, and then the most recent article that I wrote was last fall for the Indiana Audubon Society on how to approach learning Raptor ID. They wanted me to write an article and keep it under 1,000 words on Raptor ID. And I said, that might be a little difficult. Seeing as how most of my Raptor ID seminars are 3-4 hours long. And that still doesn't cover everything. So that should do it. So does anybody have any questions? Some are to some extent, others are not. Nobody really knows what's going on with rough-legged hawks. There's seems to be some cyclical movement with it. Bald eagle populations are soaring. They're starting to nest in urban areas. Osprey numbers are increasing. They're nesting in cell towers right here in Lake County. Last year, a group of, I think there's 5 of us, we found 14 active nests. Well, there was actually 18 nests, but 14 of them actually were active. And 2 of the nests weren't discovered until late in August. And I can assure you that there were probably 20 nests here in Lake and McHenry County. So they're exploding. Other birds like sharp-shinned hawks, their numbers are going down, but they don't think it's a problem with population. They think what's happening with them is a thing called short stopping. The birds aren't migrating as far south. And it could be for a couple of reasons. One, it could be because of climate change. It could also be because these birds are getting a lot more urbanized. We're starting to see merlin throughout the winter here in the Chicago area. So there, it's an ongoing thing. There is a group, a collaboration of 4 organizations, and it's called the RPI Project. If you go on the internet and just type in Raptor Population Index on Google, you'll get to the website, and there's a ton of information there. Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, you could almost make the argument that the evolution from silver-based to digital was as big a change as maybe the invention of photography in the first place.
Yeah.
You've got experience with both of those media. Could you imagine what your career had been like had digital never showed up? The learning curve.
Yeah.
Product you could have, or how many?
Right.
What do you think would have been like?
Yes. No, I typically don't. Other people see them. You know, I'm not going anywhere. And if I see something really special, I basically don't. Yeah, I'm not much of an e-birder. I have in the past put stuff there, but regularly where I'm going, people are seeing them in those places. It's not an unusual find or anything. Yeah.
So if you had like tens of thousands of your photos in like this portion, it seems like you go out throughout the year.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. What's that? Oh yeah. On more distant birds. That's why I sold my 500 millimeter lens, because that's what I would get. And but because of observations, I've learned how to get relatively close to them. The other thing too is in the middle of winter, if it's below 35 degrees, you're going to have a hard time shooting from the car. We lower all the windows, turn the heats off, and get the inside of the car at the same temperature as the outside, because the heat comes out of the car and it just forms. You can't see it, but sure enough, your lens sees it. And you get that heat rising like that, and it's a distortion. Yep.
There's been an osprey across from Menards to Milwaukee Avenue for a couple of years now. Cell tower.
Right, right. Yeah, I knew about that one when it was first discovered. It was 3 years ago. Yeah, and that it was hard to tell what happened there this year. There was a lot of construction going on in that parking lot down there. And the birds, the male and the female were there, and the female was sitting on the nest, but I never ever saw a nestling and never saw a fledgling from that nest this year. Yeah, you did? Okay, yeah, and we never saw that. We did. There are times where a third osprey will show up, but I never saw that progression where, you know, you start seeing the nestlings' heads stick out and for a couple of weeks, and then they're, you know, flying to the next tower and stuff. Anybody else?
Questions online.
Oh,
Well, as you can see, Vic actually knows raptors so well that the raptors know him. So they come to him now. He's being modest. But we welcome everybody to stay after, if you can stay for a little while out in the, and the people that are on Zoom are missing that we had the pastries flown in from France this morning, but they're missing out on that. So you guys get to eat more. But thank you, and wonderful presentation. And welcome next month.